All right. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing good today. Thank you for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining for this Learning and Growing 2021 presentation, Flipped Classrooms, Two Sides of the Same Coin. My name is Ryan Hannafin, and I'm a member of the marketing team here at Hawks Learning. Our presenter today is Dr. Kymberli Barker from Central Carolina Community College. Dr. Barker is an educator and program developer in sciences, health sciences, psychology, and criminal justice. Her undergrad is in biology, chemistry, and math with research in genetics. She earned her master's degree and PhD in psychology with forensic specialization. And Dr. Barker has taught from middle school to college courses and is also a forensic psychology consultant and works with agencies outside education. We will have a live Q&A session with Dr. Barker today, so feel free to direct any questions you have into the Q&A box. You should see a button at the bottom of the screen, and we will address those as we go through the presentation today. If anybody has any other concerns or anything like that, like I see some people already using the chat feature, that's great. Feel free to interact however you like, but let's go ahead and try and keep the questions towards the Q&A just to kind of keep everything organized. On that note, I will hand it over to Dr. Barker.
Hi. So first of all, I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Hawks Learning for sponsoring this symposium. I really enjoy engaging with other educators on multiple levels, both as a presenter and also attending these conferences. I actually do enjoy continuing education programs very much, and I think they're very helpful for many of us. So with all of that being said, I'm going to try to share my screen now to help you all with a PowerPoint that I've developed to be able to present this information. And I want to offer a caveat before I do, in that I teach in a flipped classroom format, which means I don't like to simply present. I actually enjoy an engaged classroom and focus heavily on that aspect of teaching and education. So any questions you have throughout the presentation, at any time you want to put them in the Q&A, Ryan has agreed to help me monitor that so that I can make sure that I'm addressing your questions and concerns as opposed to simply reading from a PowerPoint or presenting in that fashion. So let's see if I can get this working correctly. I'm going to tell it to share screen. Now I teach in a number of different formats. So I teach in Zoom and also Collaborate. Let's see if that works. There we go. I teach in the Zoom format, Collaborate format. I teach in Moodle, School Center, Google Classrooms. So periodically, I find that I have to remind myself exactly how to get from one thing to the other. And the challenge that I'm having right now is where the drop-down screen is, Ryan. It's not allowing me to get to my PowerPoint as a slideshow. Any advice on this?
Yeah, if you go to try to go into the slideshow tab up there towards the top center.
Yeah, it's covered by the drop-down screen itself, this part. Yep.
Oh man.
Anything we can do? Maybe if I double click it, do you think that'll open it up?
Nope. How about the bottom right button where it's kind of like a very small icon that looks like arrows going out to expand? That might help. Let's see.
I don't see it on this end. I'm sorry, guys, but we'll get this straightened.
Yeah, you're good.
Reading view.
Can you click and drag the little menu that's blocking you through Zoom?
I can. Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, so let's try here. Slideshow.
Yep, slideshow,
Yeah,
and then from beginning.
There we go. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. So sorry about that little momentary lapse, but this does happen sometimes. So anyhow, I'm happy to present with you all the flipped classrooms format, looking at both sides of the coin, meaning looking from the student's perspective as well as the instructor's perspective. And this was actually a presentation that we had put together, a colleague and I, from two different disciplines on our campus at Central Carolina for the North Carolina Community Colleges convention last year. And he was teaching in the CTE department, and I'm, of course, teaching in psychology and criminal justice, although not on that campus at this moment. And so what we have done, or what I did, is I wound up trying to develop a way to share this concept with instructors at different levels of education. And the way that I always begin presenting is I try to explain to the classroom or to the audience what the goal is here. And so we're trying to work through this agenda today. You've already heard my background. I want to discuss a little bit about brain research with you all, the exact idea, what is a flipped classroom, the relevant pedagogy, the history of the flipped classroom, although I'm probably going to gloss over that, as well as current research. And then the responsibilities of both the instructor or facilitator and the student, because we all do have our responsibilities to make this classroom work effectively. There are a number of different formats we can use for the flipped classroom, and we're going to discuss each of those, especially now that we're not all just teaching in a traditional seated classroom. I want to speak about some specific examples of pre-work, classroom work, and post-work, and some positives and negatives that go with this format as with anything else, and give you some examples of student work, and then open it up for additional questions and conversation. Again, please don't hesitate to stop me as I'm going through to tell me I'm speaking too quickly or something didn't make sense or you have a question or anything to add to the conversation, because that's the goal here. So Ryan has already given you a little bit of my background. Here it is in a nutshell. I believe the PowerPoints are made available to everyone after the presentation, if I remember correctly. So I won't go into this in detail because you can look this up. You can find this. Specific applications, though, I am going to discuss a bit with you simply because some of the feedback I've gotten before from other instructors and colleagues that I work with is that newer instructors, newer teachers may not feel as comfortable teaching in this format. And they also may not feel as comfortable teaching in this format if you're a middle school instructor, because you feel like perhaps you won't have control of your classroom. And that's of great concern to many instructors. You do want to have good classroom management. But I want to help assuage some of those concerns or fears by saying I have 22 years experience in public education and teaching on the college level. And I've taught middle school through high school and college. Some of my students have actually gone through with me from middle school to high school to college and then come back to teach with me, which is kind of cool, getting to watch that continuum in their lives. This also is applicable over a number of different specialties and disciplines. I've taught math in this format, statistics, algebra, science, health sciences, psychology and criminal justice, biomedicine, biotechnology, many variations on this theme. So it's not limited only to the sciences. It's also not limited only to the humanities, which seems to be a concern that other instructors have also voiced with me. I've taught this in this capacity and this format in the IB programs, regular ed, AIG. Again, you can read this on the screen. So anyways, many, many different ways to apply teaching in a flipped classroom format that are effective and, you know, encourage a valuable learning experience. So some of the examples where we've used this before is in charter schools, local county schools, different colleges in different levels of college education in a number of different states. Also, as Ryan mentioned, I've worked outside and do work outside as a consultant with forensic psychology. So I work with the legal system, court applications, training with police departments. I'm working with the police department now on sex trafficking with their sex trafficking division and how to develop curriculum to raise awareness about this. So it's not only something that is applicable to the seated traditional public education classroom or college classroom. We're going to start right now, though, with a little bit of interaction from you all, I'm hoping, just to make sure that I haven't put you to sleep already in the first 2 minutes of the presentation. And I want you to answer in the Q&A, if you don't mind, what you think each or all of these boxes represents. So box number 1, if you would just put in what you think that that box is showing us, box number 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to give you a moment to think through those. And I can see that people are answering. Let's see if I can get it to open. Yep, good, Kathleen, very good. Cassie, same. Okay, good. So we've got number 1 down. What do we have for box number 2? I'm trying not to cover the box itself. Blood is thicker than water. Good, just between you and me, that's box number 2. Cornerstone is number 3. And typically, historically, box number 4 gives the most difficulty. So let me minimize this again and give y'all some more opportunity to think through this. So we're looking at box number 4 now. And I'm going to go back and check in the question and answer session. Sorry, I wish you all could raise your hands or turn on your microphones. Yes. All right, Lindsay, and it looks like Lindsay and Donna. Okay, Steve and Lindsay, very good. 10 ants, so 10 ants. And it, just to go over this and cover this again, so you've got blood is thicker than water in box number 1, just between you and me in box number 2, cornerstone in box number 3, and 10 ants in box number 4. So this is actually one of the activities that I do with my students, not the same one each time, and I encourage them to create their own sort of puzzles, either in this format or in other formats, to make what we're covering, the material that we're covering in class, a little bit more interesting than just a dull and boring presentation or lecture every single time. And there's a reason for this. And many of you that have been in education for a while probably are aware of a chart similar to this, or this very chart, talking about some of the retention rates for material covered in a classroom or any learning environment. That there are passive teaching methods and there are participatory teaching methods. And if you look at the chart itself here, you can see that we typically accept the fact that when someone is sitting and listening to someone else lecture, they're possibly retaining maybe 5% of that material, 10% if you're reading because you're at least engaging with the material to some level, although I know that I can read a textbook and it'll just wash right over my head and I won't save any of that material. 20% if there's audio-visual activity like a video we're doing right here or a PowerPoint, 30% for demonstration, so on and so forth. And of course, you guys can read this as well and take home this information as well. But the idea is that the more engaged we are with what we're doing, the more likely we are to remember what we're doing. There is a caveat to that, and I want to discuss that with you as well. But for the most part, if you can get someone to actively take part in their education process, then they will have a sense of ownership, first of all. And second of all, brain research shows ourselves that we get our neurons firing and we get the connections being made, and actually increases brain mass. That's a conversation for another time. But it does encourage students to remember and learn the material. And this is a fact of the process of memory. And we cover that in psychology courses as well. Now, I mentioned there's a caveat to this. Does anyone have an idea, and if you'll put this in the chat, what do you think might change this for somebody, or what might be some challenges or concerns with the idea that the more active a person is, the better they will retain information? And I'm going to look in the chat to see if anybody, or sorry, in the question and answer to see if anybody has any ideas or thoughts about this. Okay, so I don't see any over here. I'm going to minimize this again. Hopefully I'm doing this correctly. And the reason I wanted to stop here for a second is because when I was a new teacher, this was current research. People were starting to really recognize the fact that the old habits of simply lecturing to somebody were not nearly as effective as more interactive types of activities, things that engaged the student learner or the adult learner, whichever way you want to look at it. But there have been some challenges to these philosophies in recent years. And I want to see how familiar you all are with that before we go on in the conversation. So Steve says some are shy and won't do well in the active method. Okay. Eric says level of introversion of the student. Very good. Both of you. And Kathleen talks about group discussions, says this is great when students discuss and are prepared to discuss. Okay, so good. Yeah. All three of these come into play, as well as the idea of the multifaceted learner or the multiple learning styles. How many of you all, by a show of hands, are familiar with the idea of multiple learning styles or multiple learning theory? And I can't find my show of hands on here. So let's go back to the question and answer. If you are, just give me a thumbs up or a smiley face or something. that
It looks
lets me.
like people are also using the chat, so I'm not sure if you have that open as well, but looks
I
like we're
didn't,
getting a lot of
but I
responses
will go there.
We're getting a little bit of both. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm learning along with y'all today. So we don't have emojis. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So a smiley face. There we go. Old-fashioned smiley face. There's an emoji. So I guess some computers do and some don't. Individual temperament, personalize the topic. Okay. I'm just skimming the question and answer right now. Thumbs up. Okay, very good. There is a raise hand button. I thought there was on your end, but I can't see the result on my end.
Right. There is. I'm not entirely sure if we'll be able to turn on microphones
Okay.
to do that, but we can definitely try it.
That's fine. That's fine. You gave me an idea how many people are present, and I'm just trying to get an idea where we're starting from so that I'm not, beating a dead horse, that we're not going over material that everybody already knows. So one of the concerns with regard to multiple learning styles is that some people feel that or do actually learn better from an auditory method, some through a visual method. And you all are somewhat probably familiar with this as educators. And you know that if you're in a classroom with 24 to 32 students, you can't meet all of these needs. There's just no way that we can do it on every topic and fulfill all of these needs and ensure that we've gotten all the material across. So when we put the onus back on the student to be responsible for their education, it gives them the opportunity not only to show responsibility, but to kind of get excited about the idea that they're learning and they understand how they're learning and they're applying their learning style to this. So that's one of the caveats I want you all to keep with you, please, as we have this conversation. Some students are going to feel very uncomfortable because they feel they are an auditory learner and they're used to having someone speak to them or speak in front of them, or they feel that they are just a visual learner. They're used to watching presentations that others do as opposed to what they do. Also, I believe a number of you noted that this goes to the student comfort level. You have introverts versus extroverts, obviously, and not everybody is comfortable presenting or sharing their own ideas. So one of the first things we need to do is build a comfort level, okay? Build a community around these students so that they feel safe and secure in this environment doing this particular task, which is going to be new to a number of people. Okay, there we go. So when we're thinking about a flipped classroom, obviously there's a definition here and you all can read it, so I'm not going to read it to you. But a lot of people have the idea that the ideas were just flipping things. We're doing things in different order. And to some extent that is correct, but it's not the whole story. So there's a specific way that we need to go about developing our coursework, our classroom activities, our post activities, in order to make them beneficial. It's not just saying, you go watch this video, then we come talk about it in class, although sometimes that's effective. But the idea is that we are kind of changing the structure and we're trying to maximize our time with our students, whether, again, they're adult learners or whether they're junior high or elementary school learners. Okay. So Bloom's taxonomy, when we think about the traditional Bloom's taxonomy, you probably are aware of this as well, that we build from this base of remembering information, understanding, again, a general idea of being able to do vocabulary or solve a problem, apply it to some extent to maybe another problem that's similar to the problem that we were trained to solve, and way at the top, we get to create things. What happens is in a traditional classroom, very often we're focusing on, and a number of educators have been trained to focus on, encouraging the basics because of test taking. And we know that that's something we have to consider, especially in public education. Vocabulary, how to apply vocabulary, how to solve a problem, how to replicate the problem. It's not very often in a traditional classroom that the students get the opportunity to flip this on its head, where the emphasis is creating, developing, evaluating, synthesizing, analyzing concepts that have been introduced to them prior to the classroom. So what happens is we'll see that in the classroom, you're covering the basics, and the child is sent home or the adult is sent home to create or complete an assignment that is much more elevated, and they don't have the structure or the immediate feedback for doing so. And it can become quite frustrating for an individual. So what happened over time was a number of instructors almost simultaneously discovered there were some issues with this. The children, I apologize, I keep saying children because the bulk of my education is working with public education. So the student covers the basic material in the classroom, and then they're sent home with these challenges to create that is graded as homework, and this is the bulk of their grade, yet there's no immediate feedback at home. And when they turn in the assignment the next day in class or at the end of the week in class, their grade is assessed on that, whereas it could have been done in sort of a flipped format, such as the flipped classroom idea, where the bulk of their assessment is occurring in the classroom environment. The bulk of their activity is occurring in the classroom environment. Their pre-work is occurring at home, and then their post-work or reflection is also occurring at home. So you can look through the history that I'm sharing here with you in this PowerPoint. You can also look these up. I've included a reference list at the end, so you can read a little bit more about it. But it discusses the development of the flipped classroom concept and how this occurred and why it occurred. You're going to recognize some of the names on here, like Khan Academy. I actually prefer even Crash Course to the Khan Academy or the Brain Games videos, and why and how they were developed. But you don't need me to read to you about this. And some of the feedback I've gotten about presenting this before is that although people gained some new information, a lot of it was information they already had. So I changed this a little bit for today, and I wanted to spend a little more time with you all. And there's some of the current research. I wanted to spend a little more time with you all in focusing on what exactly the student is responsible for, what the instructor is responsible for, and what does this actually look like in a classroom. So what are some actual examples of a flipped classroom format? So we developed, my colleague and I developed an acronym here for the flipped classroom based on learning. And obviously we have the instructor facilitator side of the coin, and then the student's side of the coin. Okay. And the job of the instructor or facilitator is to liberate the students to be able to work, to be able to own their education, to be able to take responsibility for their education, and then earmark certain pieces of information for them to help them process as they go through this developmental stage, to be able to abridge information for them so that they're not receiving an entire textbook and just being told to, you're responsible for everything that's in this textbook, which seems insurmountable and a bit overwhelming for new learners to this format. And then remember to go back and review this content and nurture them as they're going through this process. Whereas the students need to be able to look and listen to the information that's provided prior to class. They need to engage while they're in class. They need to ask for help. If they need help, they need to assist their colleagues, their classmates. If their classmates need help, they need to take the time to reflect on what they're doing in the classroom. And then also they need to be responsible for nurturing and naturalizing this, so it becomes a more comfortable environment for them. So basically, in a flipped classroom format, what you're looking at is three primary components. We're looking at what we're doing out of class, prior to class, then what we're doing during class, in class, and then the post-classroom activity. So prior to coming to class, most students don't do anything. They come to class and they wait for the teacher to lift the lid off their head and kind of stuff it full of information, and they send them home. And then they take a test or a quiz or do an activity and they're graded on that, and it's done, and they move on to the next concept. What we're trying to do here instead is encourage students to prepare for class. And I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to tell you a little bit. I taught IB science in 8th grade IB science a number of years ago. And as a science instructor, I came in on the cusp of what we called science through inquiry. So we were encouraged not to give information at all. That the idea was the student would come to class, you give them a box of things to play with as a lab that had all the materials they would need and the instructions they would need, but it would not tell them what their goal was or what the objective was, so forth and so on. Anyways, at this time, when we would come to class, I would encourage my students to read and prepare before class. During class, we would have the during class activity, the experiment, what have you. And then after class, they would kind of summarize what they've learned. I had them using Cornell notes. And then I would take their notebooks from them. And they were not allowed to have their notebooks over the weekend, and they would take a test on it on Monday. And you can imagine probably how the parents of these IB and advanced and gifted students felt about their students not being able to cram for their tests on Monday morning. But the result was that the students learned to engage prior to class, engage during class, develop a summary of the material they had learned so it was fresh in their mind, and then come to class for their test or the evaluation or assessment without having crammed over the weekend. And it was remarkable the increase in scores for these students. Now, you might think that was just one class, but it wasn't. It was the IB students I worked with. It was also the regular ed students I worked with through a number of different disciplines. And the reason is because instead of just sitting and listening to me like y'all are doing right now, they were actually engaged in what it was they were doing. They were creating experiments. They were telling me what they learned from their experiments as they were going on. And they were writing down in their own words a summary of this. So they were actively hearing, seeing, writing, engaging, talking about the material, and then they were testing on it a little bit later. And so they were involving a number of different protocols for improving retention and memory. Okay, so story time. For those of you who are in public education and might be familiar a little bit with this, how many of you, and I'm going to go back to the question and answer if you don't mind for just a second, I want to get an idea, how many of you all are public educators or have had experience in public education? Can you give me a smile, an exclamation mark, just something to show me that you're engaging here or in the chat? Okay, either way is fine. Okay, good. All right, so quite a few of you. All right, so I'm going to see if you can do this for me. Again, it's hard to do without being able to turn on the microphones, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and Dr. Barker, I just want to butt in here quick, and we do have that working so that if you want to do that type of format where we can have, somebody raise their hand, I can turn on somebody's mic one at a time. So we can do that.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay, yes. Thank you very much. It makes me happy. Okay, so in our public education system in North Carolina, and specifically in Moore County, I began teaching in a county that it used to kind of frustrate me and say anything that came down the pike, my county jumped on it. And they're like, okay, now we need to teach like this. But some of these things actually were born out over time, and I still utilize them to this day. How many of you all are familiar with writing lesson plans in this format? Okay, where you have an EQ. Who knows what an EQ is and can tell me what that stands for?
Feel free to raise your hands and we can go ahead and turn your mic on for you if you'd like. All right, Paula?
Essential question.
Okay, good. Where do we get the essential question, Paula?
From your standard.
Okay, so the standard is supposed to be addressing what? What are we covering in the standard?
I'm not sure where you're going with that question.
Okay, so the essential question on a daily basis.
Oh, on a daily basis?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, you should have an overarching kind of bigger picture question, but then on the daily basis, it's what are you hoping the students to take away in that specific lesson?
Good. And you're exactly right. And somebody here has said from the learning objectives. So yes, specifically from your standard, you're trying to align with what the state and the national requirements are for this. And you're building each day your classroom activities based on what is their takeaway. What is the essential question? In our county, we were required to refer to this exactly in the nomenclature of the state objectives, what was required for that topic, that content right then. The next step in our lesson plans was to link to a particular thing. Did anyone ever have this in their lesson plans? So you state the essential question. We had to have it on our board when we were observed. Then you had to link to what? Does anyone have an idea? Okay. link to, sorry, let me scroll it down here. Course level objectives. Okay. Yep. That's what the essential previous knowledge. Yes. Prior knowledge. So we started each day by having the essential question up on the board. Students knew what they were going to cover. There was a link or an opening segue, opening parlay into the lesson by linking to prior knowledge. So we're making a connection to something we've covered previously in this course. I also would include outside courses. So trying to get some cross-curricular content in there. And we had the body of the lesson, whether it was an experiment or a PowerPoint or a small group discussion, debate, whatever it was. Then there was an assessment of that material during that time. And then we had a ticket, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the blank for you here, out the door. So we would do our ticket out the door multiple ways. And what that meant was the student had to summarize what they covered in class by either answering a question, solving a problem, proving that they understood the content as they go out the door. Now, there are many things that I love about this very formalized lesson plan format. However, for someone like me, I would get tongue tangled as a student. I would have gotten nervous. I wouldn't have been able to flip that material around and reply about it that quickly due to my own learning difficulties. So that was a challenge for me, and it made many students that I knew somewhat uncomfortable. Okay, and here's an example. So story time. I was teaching IB science. I was teaching through inquiry-based learning. And again, as I said before, the idea was we would give them a box of things to play with based upon material in the chapter we were covering, and they would create an experiment or a project ad hoc, like on the spot, out of this, and then they would tell us what they learned from it. And my students loved me, and I loved my students. And I was being evaluated that day by the guru in our county. I mean, everybody knew this principal, president, instructor, everything. And I was an absolute nervous wreck because it was my first year back teaching, and this was a new format. Anyhow, long story short, the experiment we were having that day was on creating hail in a test tube, hail, frozen ice, variations on a theme in a test tube. And it was a really exciting experiment. The students were excited about doing it. They knew that they were going to do it. They knew that we were being evaluated by Dr. Fry. And she was a very interactive principal. And she would walk around and she would talk with the students as we were doing this, and they were hitting their marks. I mean, they were all over it. They had written out their experimental portion. They had used their vocabulary. They were just, I was so impressed with them. And she was impressed with them. And she got called out right before the end assessment, where I get to wrap everything up with my students and say, so what did you learn? How did it go? That sort of thing. And I found after she left that at the beginning of the experiment, you're supposed to write down the initial temperature, okay? And at the end of the experiment, you're supposed to write down the final temperature. And it never occurred to me to cover with these super bright students what the definition was of initial or final temperature. So when I looked at their lab write-ups, at their papers that were in front of them, almost without exception, the students had written down their initials for their names. And I don't know if you're laughing right now, but it threw me for a loop. It had never occurred to me that in inquiry-based learning, which was so exciting and such a fun way to learn, that there still needed to be some content. And it was a game changer for me. So I started to look at different ways to do this. And I started to look at different philosophers and different researchers on recommendations. And this is how I came upon the flipped classroom format. So it's not just inquiry-based learning. It's not just kind of letting the kids or the students fly by the seat of their pants. It's providing some structure before class, providing a developed protocol or developed experiment or activity during class, and then wrapping it up with a reflection activity. And I thought this kind of met all of our needs, given the idea that you need to know what the initial temperature is when you're doing this experiment. So as we look at the flipped classroom format, there are 4 specific pillars that we need to try to follow when we're building our classes this way. There needs to be a flexible environment. So the inquiry-based learning is a great strategy for this. The students need to be able to engage at their comfort level. There also needs to be a positive learning culture, as I mentioned from the beginning, developing a relationship with your students, developing a community between the students. My students, even from my first year of teaching, called each other colleague. They were thinking of themselves as scientists. They were professionals in the field, and they would treat each other with respect. And I've, knock wood, never had to engage with any situations where that didn't occur, because they were so excited to be treated with respect themselves. There also needs to be intentional content. So you can't just walk into a flipped classroom environment and say, okay, y'all did the reading, now what do you want to know? Let's chat. Although some days it's beneficial to do a similar activity like that, so they realize that the onus is upon themselves to come with questions, to do some additional enrichment prior to engaging in the classroom. And you also need to act as though you're a professional educator, which I'm sure everybody does. I think that's kind of a given. But again, this is an acronym to remember the parts of the flipped classroom format. Now, when we're looking at specific classroom activities, we have to consider that things have changed, especially in the past year, obviously, and then also with the advent of technology. When I began teaching, I was required by my mentor instructor to have an online classroom based content. So my students could always access the material. I was trained that way. I came up that way. So even now, regardless of whether it's a seated, hybrid, or completely online course, their content is held online so that they can get to it any place, anytime. And they have that access, and they know that they do. So when we're thinking about classroom structure, there are typically three basic formats: the seated classroom, the blended learning, whether it's hybrid with a seated portion or a synchronous collaborate time like I'm doing right now online, or fully distance or digital learning. Now, obviously, some of these are going to lend themselves better to teaching in a flipped classroom format than others. There are going to be challenges in certain types of teaching formats. And I'm going to stop right there again and open for any questions you have at this point. What do you think personally, or have you had any difficulties with trying to teach in this format in a specific learning environment? So I want to make sure that I'm addressing your specific needs. Okay, I don't see anything in the question and answer. Let me look over in the chat, or raise your hand.
And feel free to raise your hands if anybody wanted to contribute as well.
Good. Modeling is great too. And I want to apologize. I have an Akita who is he's an empath, and he can now hear us talking and hearing me get excited. So he's whining, and I do apologize for that. Concern with doing group work in an online format. Okay. What do you do if students have not done their pre-reading? Yeah, so that is always a challenge, and I'll explain how I'm going to try to answer each of these. I'm going to skim them really quickly when they haven't done the pre-work before coming to class. Okay. And I haven't looked to the end of these questions.
Yeah, in the Q&A, we have one that says Excel in technology. And then Megan said, collaboration is impossible with asynchronous.
Okay, so it might feel impossible, but I'm going to just throw some ideas out at you, okay? And you let me know what you see as being the difficulty with these ideas. And I'm going to resort to the vernacular here right now. My colleague with him, I was originally developing this as a new instructor. And he said, so you don't just use a flipped classroom format, you teach in the Socratic method, which is like flipped classrooms on crack cocaine, and new instructors are going to be intimidated. And I said, okay, I'm going to take that to heart. And I want to slow down on this portion and answer these questions for you to make sure that I'm not addressing these. So, in a traditional seated classroom, I think we can probably see how to break up the pre-work, the in-classroom work, and the post-work. Also, with a hybrid learning environment, whether it's synchronous online or in a physical classroom, we can see how to break up those three sections of work, and we can talk about specific examples in a moment. But when we're in a fully digital environment, I will agree that poses a bit more of a challenge. So we have the first challenge that a few people have thrown out there, which is, what do you do when students haven't done the pre-work before coming to class? I'm a psychologist, and I'm a behaviorist specifically. So I tend to be carrot, carrot or the stick, and I'm a little bit more carrot, actually a lot more carrot than I am stick. And what I've found is students respond so much better to positive interventions, positive reinforcements, than they do to negative or positive punishment. I do give grades. I'm considered strict by a lot of people, but I encourage them heavily. I look for an approximation of the goal, because you're going to have students who are not comfortable with their reading skills, are not comfortable with their technology skills, don't want you to see their home environment if it's a synchronous classroom, don't want to even speak in a synchronous classroom. I have students in one of my classrooms right now with the semester that just ended. One classroom had 25 students in it, and they hit the ground running, and they just took over the class, and it was phenomenal. I mean, I learned so much about psychology in that class with them. And I had another classroom, had only 12 students in it originally, and they did not have the same dynamic. They didn't want to turn on their microphones. They didn't want to engage in group work. And it took a lot of developing the relationship in that classroom dynamic to be able to pull out of the students the idea that they actually wanted to learn this way. So I do this kind of like a parent with a small child. When you put the child in, let's say you use the timeout idea, if you put the child in timeout, you need to make everything else that's going around outside of that child so exciting that they don't like being in timeout. So I try to make the activity so much fun, so cool, that you want to read so you can engage in the activity, if that makes any sense. And again, it puts a little bit more work on me, and it's not every single class that's this way, but there are some that are this way. So first of all, to address that, when they don't read or they don't want to do their pre-work, I try to discuss with the student why. It might be that they're not comfortable reading. We might be looking at a 504 issue that we're not aware of, or some other type of an issue. It might be that they haven't been able to have access to their textbook, and they didn't want to tell us that. So I encourage students to realize that the content that is covered in their textbook, first of all, is covered in multiple fashions. There's Khan Academy, there's Crash Course, there's Brain Games. There are all of these online learning platforms that are exceptional. I'm not saying that we should have students do them to the exclusion of reading, but if that perhaps helps bridge the gap between a student who is not engaging to a student who wants to engage, simply by looking at some visual activities as opposed to just the textbook, I encourage that. There are also students that don't want to do the classroom or the pre-class activities because the textbooks are dull and boring, or in my case, the textbooks are they're too busy. It's almost like going to Walmart. I mean, there's stuff going on everywhere and I can't focus. That doesn't work for me. So for those students, if I can help figure out what's keeping them from reading, I can say, well, have you looked at this website? Have you looked at Google Scholar, depending on what age group I'm working with? How about this? Here's another idea. How about you find a video that you think addresses the content that we are covering in class tomorrow, and you send it to me and we'll share it in class and see if that helps other classmates who maybe are having the same difficulty. So I try to use it to my advantage to just engage students who are not engaged in helping me understand why they're not engaged and what I can do to help bridge that gap. And it helps to build a relationship when I'm doing that. I hope I answered that question reasonably well. And if not, we can certainly go back to it. Asynchronous online portion of the mixed model. Okay, so for instructors out there who aren't familiar with the synchronous versus asynchronous components in the classroom right now, so perhaps your campus doesn't use this type of technology, what we've done, especially since some of the COVID precautions and in this past year, is courses that were normally taught in a seated environment are now taught in this environment, online. And as you can tell, I'm right now trying to determine whether while I'm presenting, whether I want to look at my PowerPoint, I want to look at the chat, I want to look at myself, what I'm doing, because it's just me, because you all don't have your cameras on. I happen to work on a campus where we're not allowed to encourage or require that students turn on either their cameras or their microphones. And that is frustrating, both from the instructor and the student standpoint, because it feels like you're not engaged. And I know some of my students are trying, at least at the beginning of the class, to turn on their classroom time and then walk the dog, watch TV, play video games, whatever they want to do. So for the synchronous portion, I try to constantly ask questions like I've been doing with you all. I'm trying to model these behaviors as well, whether it's a silly question or I'm just saying to a particular student that I can see is not engaged, Catherine, what do you think about this? What did you find? We were talking about this the other day. What did you find online that was so interesting? Because we had a conversation about it. That encourages them to open up. In the asynchronous portion with the mixed classrooms, I actually ask students to bring me material. When I was teaching in the high school, I would have students that got so excited about doing this. They would send me texts and emails, and I really discourage texting your instructor, but they did sometimes, with links to videos they thought were cool, that they wanted to show the next day in class, especially when we were covering biomedicine and crime scene investigation. So many of the materials that I use now in my classes and presentations actually came from students who got so excited about finding material for class. And these were students who typically didn't engage otherwise, but they had a high competency in technology. And a lot of our more introverted students do. And we just need to tap into that. So that's one of the things that I would recommend. The other is I have an active discussion board process. And I'm going to skim down and I'm going to ask you another question in a second. Email later, what do you do when they don't answer? Oh, when they don't answer in class? I move on to another person. I'm not trying to make anybody uncomfortable or single them out. It's worked to this point, I think, because again, I try to make class so interesting and the conversation so interesting and the activities so interesting that they want to engage. If it turns out that they don't, I do reach out to them, whether it's an email or a phone call, because sometimes there's an underlying problem. And I've actually just dealt with one the other day where there was a very serious underlying problem, and we were able to resolve it and get the student hopefully back on track in multiple levels of the mental health concern that we were dealing with, the student was dealing with. So if they don't answer the emails, if they don't answer the phone calls, I involve administration, and not in a punitive fashion, but as a concerned person, educator, and parent. There's just so much going on with individuals right now with regard to psychological concerns that if they're not engaging on any level, I do tend to go a little bit above and beyond right now, especially trying to get to the bottom of the problem to see if it's something that we can resolve or find a way to resolve it.
And Dr. Bacher, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. First is Josh. He says, what do we do to encourage students to unmute their video during Zoom sessions?
Well, like I said, it's unfortunate or fortunate, depending on how you look at it. My campus doesn't allow us to require them to do that, to use their microphone or their camera. So again, what I try to do is engage in a way that they have to unmute or turn on their camera, and without making them do so. So for example, and I've done this from every class that I've ever taught from the first day I've taught, and I do it every day. We have a role question, and the role question you have to address. You do not have to do it with your microphone on, but they like to do it with their microphone on because it's the only time they feel that they're talking in class, at least initially. And my first role question to them is always, 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 which way does the toilet paper roll go? Over or under? And you're not allowed to opt out, and you're not allowed to explain yourself. You just have to say over or under, and then we have a full-fledged debate and discussion about it. And I go back and forth from the minority to the majority of who says what and why. And I use this and I explain it to them as we go through the process. I want you to be able to assess a problem, state your position, and support your position. And right now we're doing about toilet paper rolls. And the next day we do it about the toothpaste. And then later we do it about whether or not marijuana should be legalized, or how do you feel about euthanasia, or whatever topic it is for whatever content I'm teaching. Let me look at what Megan wrote here. One of our language teachers has a private conversation with students who don't want to do that to help them troubleshoot and plan. Yes. That is very good. It explains why it's so important. Um, you are absolutely right. And it does have to be a private conversation. Hence my saying I typically reach out with just a generalized email at the beginning, and then I'll escalate it to a personal phone call or something. But always, I try to do it positively, not punitively. And that is because never before in the history of, or in recent history of education have we had to invite complete strangers into our home. Even as an adult and as a presenter and as someone who does this for a living, I had to think, okay, where can I sit that the light is going to be decent? Where can I sit that I'm not sitting in the middle of my living room? I have a home office, but I don't like working in that. So all these questions, even as an adult presenter, that I'm thinking our students, especially if you're in public education, are certainly considering these things. Loving this stuff face to face. Oh, this is going so fast, I can't catch. It does go over, and I can prove that too. I had a student who definitely opened up conversation, and at the end said, "Thank you for coming to my TED Talk," and I thought it was fantastic. But I agree with you. Results building video camera pauses, yes. And so, the pregnant pause, learning to wait. These things are all important, especially when you're trying to make an entire class of students comfortable with the idea that their voices need to be heard. I want to hear your opinion because many of them have only heard, heretofore, whatever the instructor told them to hear. Okay. And so that's good. Giving them time to respond, giving them time to think through the question. Also, for me, looking to see whether it's in the question and answer session or if they've raised their hands or whether or not my video is reconnecting and they're all laughing at me, which happens very often, to be honest. No unrolls. Yes, but oh, I'm not even gonna jump on that. That's a conversation for another time. We'll do another presentation on toilet paper rolls. Just so you all know, Oprah Winfrey actually did this as one of her segments one day, and they broke out into fights in the audience over this question. So I've always found it fascinating.
We also had a question from Fernando asking, would you consider student-led discussions part of the flipped instruction strategies?
Oh, absolutely. And I will tell you, okay, I'm going to use this one class as an example. It's not because it's my only class, but it's fresh in my memory because we just ended our class session the other day, and my campus is preparing for graduation now. And I actually have student examples of work towards the end. So when you all look at the PowerPoint later, if you do, feel free to reach out to me. I can give you examples. They've all told me, sure, use it for whatever, because they want to be famous. They're very excited about their work. All of that said, this particular class on the very first day of class, Collaborate dumped me again and again and again. And instead of, and I don't know if it was just that group of students or what, I've had pretty good luck, but instead of leaving the classroom or giving up, when I came back in, they were teaching each other how to turn on their cameras and how to use the microphones and how to post things and where the textbook was in the classroom. And it was incredible. And you'll see at the end, if you do go back and look at this PowerPoint, that I have examples of their discussion board, their ongoing conversation. I put things back on them, whether it is in a seated classroom or an online classroom. And students who went through the whole biomed, biotech program with me that I helped develop for Moore County schools in North Carolina, they, if they're with me their first year, we were all getting to know each other, but I had some students that took 2, 3, 4 classes with me. And it was funny, by the time they were seniors, if a new person, and there were sometimes that I taught 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th all in one classroom, and 3 or 4 different pieces of content all in one classroom at the same time. And the joke was that some new student would join the class and they'd say, Ms. Barker at the time, Ms. Barker, I have a question. And I'd say, I have an answer. And invariably a senior would say, she is not going to answer your question. She's just going to ask you another question. And that's true. That's what I did. So to get them talking to each other and relying on each other more than they rely on me. And so no toilet paper roll webinars. I guess we won't do that then. But I agree, it does go over. I think I've scrolled to the bottom here. I want to
There's still
sure.
It looks like there's a couple we may not have gotten to in the Q&A. Donna asked, how do you do group activities in an asynchronous environment?
Okay. They will actually develop that themselves. And this is the thing that's really interesting about all of this, is given left to their own devices and with appropriate scaffolding, okay, providing information, ways to access information, a comfortable environment where they feel confident in asking and answering questions, they will come up with the best ways. So I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but I can't even remember the names of these applications now, because of course I'm pressuring myself to remember them, so I can't. Discord. So there are pieces of technology that they've learned either on their own or in other classes that they know about that I don't know about. And so if I say, and this happens almost invariably, if I say, hey, how about you guys put together the session tomorrow? Everybody whose last name is the first third of the alphabet, you have objective 1. The second third of the alphabet has objective 2, so forth and so on. Present your information. You guys meet up in a group, however you want to do it. No requirements, no specifications. Then present it in the discussion board, okay? And the rule for the discussion board in my classroom is that you have to provide citations and references for every statement. So it's not just, hey, good job, I like what you said. And I like cats too. They have to give a scientific answer with citations and references. So they're already having to do a bit of work. But what they get excited about is the idea that they are developing this work and they're sharing it with their colleagues. So in a completely asynchronous, fully digital learning environment, I can give an assignment, tell them to create their own groups based on certain criteria, and this is due in the discussion board in a couple days. And almost without fail, they will come back with something that is more creative and more interactive than anything I ever concerned. They do Snapchats with each other about classes. They do Discord, and I'm still not really sure what that is because I don't engage in it. They develop, and that is because almost, again, without fail, you'll find that if you give them the opportunity and the encouragement to do so, you're going to have some type A personalities, and we discuss what that means too in my classes. But you're going to have some people that jump in and are like, I don't have time for this woman's nonsense. So here's the list. This is what you're doing. This is what you're doing. This is what I'm doing. And then they present it because they just want it off their plate. It is very seldom, very infrequently that I've had a situation where a group just either didn't understand the assignment or didn't understand the prompt or just didn't want to engage. And I just come back in and I put the blame on myself typically because I can and it doesn't bother me. And I can say, I'm so sorry, I must not have been clear. And we've talked about cognitive differences in class and how people interpret things differently. And we'll give it another shot. Does anybody else have an idea about this particular topic? And that's probably the best that I can tell you as far as that that question goes, is that if you give them, give them the opportunity to show off, that's what I call it, that they will absolutely do it for you. So let's see, where else am I on these questions?
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple more, but I do want to let you know that we are right about at the 1 hour mark now. So I wasn't sure if you had any more slides that you wanted to get through or anything like that.
I do, but frankly, I feel like this is more beneficial. If y'all want me to go through the slides, I'm happy to do it, but you can read, and so
Right.
there are slides. And what I did not do is I didn't include link to students' work because it became so burdensome I couldn't get it to load. However, if you want to reach out to me, I am more than happy to provide you student examples or prompts or have conversations. We can build our own little Discord if someone here knows how to do that. But yeah, so there are some more slides with different ideas and different specific activities, but I think you can read those and develop your own questions. And I could be wrong, but I think this is really, it sounds like it's helpful. So you all haven't given me tremendous material to work with here. Is that okay with everybody? Can you tell if—
Yeah, and Dr. Barker, we have had a couple of questions, just making sure that you were going to be sharing the PowerPoint presentation afterwards. If you're comfortable with that, we can just distribute that with the recording.
Absolutely. And again, I've got students who have said, we're happy to share our project with you. You can share it with anyone you want to. You'll see when you look at the PowerPoint that there are a number of things where I've taken this. You can hear my dog. I've taken screenshots of student work. Please note, every single one of these is not an assignment. They weren't graded. They were just, I said, who wants to share this material? Or somebody has come to class, not even being asked, and said, hey, I put a PowerPoint together on how we can use the word processor to save our bibliographies or our reference list or multiple different things, variations on a theme. So if you see something that looks interesting to you, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to share with you the actual activity that these guys put together in 15 minutes in a chat session with each other, and no grade assessed, no anything. They just wanted to do it. So do we have access to the slide? So I think that's the same question about the PowerPoint, that if I share it, you'll have access, and you're more than welcome to use any of it. Slides distributed, yep. I can't tell if I'm at the bottom of the questions or if I'm missing things.
Yeah, there's a couple of Q&As if we want to do those quick. A lot of people saying thank you and great presentations. So that's always good.
Thank you. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed being here. I'm always excited when I get to actually engage. Like I said, I'm a very, very interactive instructor on every level. And so it's a challenge to talk to a screen when people don't want to engage. So you guys have done a great job, and I appreciate it. See videos on Monday nights, answer questions. Okay. Encourage students to unmute. Okay. I think we're almost down to the bottom now. Do you see anything else, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's any that we missed. Where do we find activities for learning math topics for pre-service teachers, says Wanda.
Okay, so I would first of all refer you to your state's DPI website. What they have done now, and this would be my primary recommendation for you, because that way you are in line with the curriculum that's required for your state, wherever you are. And on their websites now, you'll find that many instructors are starting to really try to embrace this inquiry-based learning philosophy, which makes me very excited. And so you'll see a lot of interactive activities. Besides that, you can actually simply Google, go to the address line and Google interactive videos for whatever the topic is. Really quickly, there's actually this, and this isn't about math, but there's one website, it's called EdHeads, that a student introduced me to years ago, and it's addictive, that you can do surgery online. Okay, so pretend surgery, it's a cartoon, it's not real, but they teach everything. You can put a car together, you can teach about, mechanics, physics, biology, everything. If you have a question about it, I assure you someone has put together a video on it and a demonstration that's much more interesting than reading a textbook. But again, if you want to hit me up, I'm more than happy to try to help you find some content if you'd like. And I promise you it'll come straight from my students because they have the best answers. Any other questions? Anything else?
Looks like we're getting to the end here. Yeah. Yes, PowerPoint slides will be available. We will get those out to everyone over the next couple of days. But yeah, well, great. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to add, Dr. Barker, I think that about wraps it up.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for interacting with me and making this enjoyable. And I hope it was a good learning experience for everybody. And please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me at KymBarkerConsulting.com online. I have a website for the forensic aspect, but it still will go straight to my email. And I'll be happy to respond and at least direct you to some resources or ask my students what they would suggest, because they've given me the best feedback. And I do update my courses every single term based upon new information they share. So thank you again for being here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like Dr. Barker said, go ahead and reach out if you guys have any questions or if anything else comes up. You can also reach out to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com, and we'll make sure that it gets over to Dr. Barker. But yeah, well, thank you again, Dr. Barker. That was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I did as well. Now I'm not sure how to get out of here, so you're gonna.
Oh, I got that handled. I'll go ahead and end the meeting now. But thanks so much, everyone, for attending, and especially thank you, Dr. Barker. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. Happy summer too, by the way.
Happy summer.
Yes.